Hello there, friends. I've recorded from this spot before, but never actually from this particular angle. And it's a really important lesson to learn in life that even a tiny little change in perspective can actually make an enormous difference. And I've been thinking over the last couple of days about peacefulness as a general subject, but also more specifically about conscientious objectors. Now, during the First World War, men would be handed, the men that refused to fight in the World War, the Great War as it was known then, men who were conscientious objectors were handed yellow's cowardly. They were handed white feathers as a mark of social disgrace by women who were basically announcing, well, that man is not for me because he won't go and fight and develop the war effort and won't defend the country. And the thing is, when faced with genetic death, we start to associate particular character traits by people who behave or who don't behave in particular ways. And I think a huge mistake that we actually make, and I will credit when I used to watch Stefan Molyneux of Freedomain Radio, as it was at the time, and he talked about conscientious objectors and being an anti-statist as a freedom lover. Obviously, he knew, as many of us do, that war is just a gigantic racket. But it was the first time that I'd heard this particular argument, was saying that, if you were singled out as somebody who wouldn't go and fight for the country, for the king, that you were one of the men that was ignored, and that you wouldn't be able to pass on your genetic heritage to the next generation. So a lot of men will have been scaremongered and warmongered into fighting in these just gigantic destructive things, the world wars in particular, that wiped out vast swathes of the population. And also, he talked about baldness, and all of these things, they all have the same common denominator, that we will go out of our way to practice things that we know in principle and in ethics are fundamentally wrong. We know that war is the greatest evil that has been inflicted on man, and there are many different kinds of war. There are the world wars that we learn about, in our history lessons at school, but there are psychological wars, and over the last 5 years, we've seen the terrible things that people will do to themselves voluntarily because they have been psyoped into a particular belief system, a thought trap. And I can't remember the name of the author at the moment, but somebody who wrote about mass formation, how delusions can take over entire populations, entire countries, continents even. And my quest has always been to stand strong in the face of ridicule, because when we're talking about baldness, we think that things happen randomly. They don't. But when things happen by design or happen on a wide scale, we assume that those decisions or thought patterns, that they're conscious. And, well, why do we have baldness? This is something that he talked about. Well, the thing is, pattern baldness is a thing because women chose the men that had the highest levels of testosterone, which we know results in baldness. We know this, but it's still ridiculed because we think it's unattractive or, for whatever reason. But it's not conscious, It's not conscious. Most people's arguments are only because they've heard it from somebody else and they're spouting something. And it can be really, really fascinating that just by making a small or innocuous comment on a Twitter post can attract some of the most fascinating arguments back, or just vitriol back. And what I'm learning to do, still in the process of doing, but actually enjoying more and more, is actually learning to be able to laugh at it and realize that most people's behavior is extraordinarily passive and reactive. And what I'm also learning to do is actually acknowledge far more that there's stuff that I've already done, and plenty of it, and it's valid stuff, valid contributions of, you know, how I'm living my life, how I'm resolving past traumas and past insecurities, and actually starting to really make something of my own life. And interestingly, there was somebody who, because obviously once you've commented on a particular post, you'll get other posts that relate to it, being fed what we want to see all the time. But the thing is, there was somebody who said, you know, should we bring back duels between men to resolve disputes? And the thing is, I said, well, yes, it's more honest and hands-on. And thinking about it, it doesn't escalate things. It doesn't turn, because obviously wars, if you think about war, it's just it's a small dispute that's escalated to basically a global scale. And so, well, keep things as much as possible as personal as you can make them. Don't escalate things so that millions and millions of people don't get embroiled in vast scale conflicts. Preserve the innocent, preserve the righteous, and don't just carpet bomb people out of existence, you know? And we did used to settle things in more discreet, private and personal ways. And guess what they did? They actually acted as a deterrent, because what war does, it takes your tax money and it uses you as collateral for bankers to raise unthinkable amounts of money and to go to war on your behalf for your safety, but ultimately fuck over your culture and your way of life and your peacefulness, you see. So all of the mass scale wars are fundamentally opposed to peacefulness and principle, and the wise and those who are brave enough to speak out on it, they're right. They're right. But in people's behavior, I see an insatiable desire to fight. Just because you fight doesn't make it right. Standing up for principle, like the conscientious objectors have done, like the bald men who have the higher levels of testosterone have done, they get ridiculed because people want to be involved in the fray. People don't want to miss out on chiming in and getting social brownie points for whatever the latest destructive belief du jour actually is. You know, people would rather stand up for or support destructive methods than be left out. But it's why I believe that the individual life is the most noble. Why? Because it's taking full and total accountability and responsibility for one's own life, which is the most peaceful and the life that's going to be most useful. Because if you're acting out of your own best interests, obviously dictated by good and honest and genuine principles, imagine if those kind of ideas were to spread how much peace would that garner? And how much influence could you actually have to affect, one of my favourite phrases, powerful and positive change? It all starts with you.